I worked night security at Graydon Asylum for 5 years. That place isn't open to the public anymore. And frankly, it shouldn't be. It was already a decaying relic when I started there in 2016, early 1900s. Psychiatric hospital buried deep in the mountains of West Virginia. Red brick walls, ivy strangling the windows, rusted steel doors that creaked even when the air was still. The kind of place where time doesn't feel like it moves forward. The silence inside is so thick it presses against your skin. Graydon had officially closed down in 1987, but a portion of it was leased by the state as a secure facility for special psychiatric cases. Not criminals per se, just people who couldn't function anywhere else. We weren't given details, and we were told not to ask. It was all hush-hush. Staff came and went, no questions asked. My job was simple: patrol all accessible floors twice a night, make sure the patients were still in their rooms, and report anything out of the ordinary. But what counted as out of the ordinary in a place like that? We weren't even allowed to access the 3rd floor. It had been condemned after a fire in the 70s, but the elevator still had a button for it. There were no lights up there, no patients, no guards, just burned-out wards and old equipment rotting under layers of ash and dust. But sometimes the elevator would stop there, not because anyone pressed the button, but because it wanted to. The first time it happened, I was with another guard, Pete. We were riding up to the admin level on 4 when the elevator jolted to a stop 3rd floor. The doors slid open, but it was just blackness on the other side. No lights, no movement, just this oppressive void, like the hallway itself was watching us. Pete laughed it off, pressed the button to close the doors. Nothing happened. We stood there for nearly a minute, neither of us speaking, both pretending not to be creeped out. Then suddenly, the doors snapped shut on their own, and the elevator resumed climbing. As if nothing had happened. That was the first night I heard the knocking. It came just before 3 a.m. the same time. From somewhere above the security office, a slow, deliberate knock, then a pause, then another, like someone was standing directly over us, knocking on the floor with their knuckles. I reported it. Maintenance said it was just the pipes. Old building. Nothing to worry about. But then I started hearing it in different places. While walking past Ward B, I'd hear it above me. In the admin corridor above again. Always from the 3rd floor. Always at 2:57 a.m. Once I decided to go up there. Just once. I took the stairs, didn't trust the elevator after what happened. My flashlight barely cut through the dark. The air got colder the higher I went. Not just physically, but something in it shifted, heavier, stagnant, like I was climbing into something that didn't want to be disturbed. The third-floor hallway was destroyed. Chunks of ceiling missing. The wallpaper had curled and peeled like dry skin. Old gurneys sat at awkward angles, half buried in debris. Graffiti marked the walls, mostly from when the place was abandoned. But there were fresher markings, too. And then I saw the doors, steel-framed, thick glass windows covered in soot. Room after room. Empty, except one. Room 312. Its door was closed, unlike the others, but not locked. The number was still legible. Someone had written over it in what looked like charcoal or ash. I never left. I should have turned back. Every instinct in me screamed not to go further, but I opened the door. There was no bed, no medical equipment, just a single wooden chair facing the wall. A crumbling mural of a garden had been painted on the brick behind it, long faded. The moment I stepped inside, my flashlight flickered, and I heard breathing. Not mine. A deep, rattling inhale. Then a slow, tremulous exhale. Right behind me, I spun around. No one was there. I backed out of the room, slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. Then, from inside 312, I heard a voice hoarse, fragile, female. They locked me in, but I can still walk the halls. I ran. That was the last time I went up there. Over the next few weeks, others began experiencing things, too. Doors slamming without cause. Patients screaming about a woman in the walls. One of the nurses quit after finding bloody handprints on the inside of the breakroom fridge, handprints that vanished an hour later when she tried to show us. Then came the dreams. People began dreaming of room 312, exact details. Same mural, same chair, same voice whispering from behind them. And in every dream, the door always locked behind them. I started leaving work early, faking stomach bugs, migraines, anything to avoid my shift past 2 a.m. I didn't want to be alone in that building after midnight. But on my final night there, the elevator stopped again. I was alone. I was trying to head down to the lower level when the elevator abruptly halted. Floor 3. Doors opened. This time, I didn't step out, but someone stepped in. She looked like a patient, thin, pale, in a hospital gown that dragged on the ground. Her hair was stringy and wet, like she'd come out of a shower, but the scent was wrong. Mildew, mold. She didn't speak, didn't even look at me. Just stood there, facing the back of the elevator as we descended at the ground floor. The doors opened. I turned to her, intending to ask if she needed help, but she was gone. The elevator was empty. I quit the next day. No 2-week notice. Just walked into the director's office, placed my badge on the desk, and walked out. Graydon was shut down entirely in 2021 after several unexplained deaths due patients and a nurse. The state quietly moved operations to another facility. No official statement. The building was left to rot, and yet, sometimes, on quiet nights I still dream of room 312. The mural on the wall, the chair, and the voice whispering right behind me. I never left. Asterisk. I used to work in patient transport at a mental health facility in Pennsylvania. It was called Ridgeway Center for Behavioral Rehabilitation, but we all just called it the Ridge. It wasn't old or abandoned like some of the horror stories you hear. It was a functioning, modern hospital. Clean, well-lit, with friendly staff and structured routines. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but the Ridge had secrets, and the deepest of them was buried beneath Ward D. Ward D was where they kept the nonverbal, high-risk patients. People who couldn't speak for themselves anymore either, because of trauma, psychosis, or something far worse. Patients who didn't have names, just numbers, and under Ward D was a basement no one talked about. I first heard about it during a night shift from a guy named Daryl, one of the older orderlies. He told me there was a soundproof room down there, not an isolation cell, not for observation. This one was different. No cameras, no ventilation. Just a concrete room with nothing inside it but a single chair bolted to the floor. I thought he was messing with me, but Daryl didn't laugh. They put a woman down there once, he said. Patient 0 to 9. You ever seen someone try to scream without making a sound? I asked why they did it, why they would put someone in a place like that. She started making the others sick, he said quietly. Not physically, just mentally. After a few minutes near her, you'd forget your own name. Or you'd start seeing people who weren't there. She didn't talk, didn't move, just stared at you until your brain started falling apart. He said the hospital couldn't medicate her, couldn't restrain her. So they moved her into that room and locked it permanently. No staff assigned. No documentation. She's still down there, he added. I didn't believe him. Not at first, until I found the key. It happened during a routine cleanup of an admin office on the second floor. The psychiatrist in charge of Ward D had retired, and I was helping pack up boxes. In the back of a desk's drawer, under years of paperwork and forms, I found a plain, unmarked key on a plastic tag. It just said, "B Senior, basement sound room." I pocketed it. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wanted to prove Daryl wrong. Maybe another part wanted to know if it was true. I didn't go down there that night, or the next, but after a few weeks, I started to notice something strange. Certain patients in ward D1s who were catatonic began reacting to the key in my pocket. One man, who hadn't spoken in years, turned his head as I walked by. His eyes went wide. Then he whispered, "She knows you have it." Another slammed her head into the bed frame repeatedly while moaning some name I couldn't understand, like a chant. I tried to get rid of the key. I threw it in a drain behind the building. But the next morning, it was back in my locker. So finally, one Friday night, I gave in. I waited until just past 3 a.m. when the hallways were dead quiet and the security cameras were rotated elsewhere. I used the service elevator to go below Ward D. The basement was mostly storage filing cabinets, broken medical equipment, stacks of unused beds. But at the very back, behind a sealed steel door, was a narrow hallway I'd never seen on any blueprint, and at the end of that hallway, just like Daryl said, was a door. Heavy, no handle, just a keyhole. The air down there was different, warmer, staler, like something had been breathing it over and over again for years. I inserted the key. The door opened without a sound. The room was pitch black. My flashlight barely pierced the air, which was filled with this fine, colorless dust that floated like smoke. And there she was, sitting in the chair, facing the wall. She looked wrong, not in some supernatural way, but in a deeply human way. Her limbs were too thin. Her hair fell in clumps, but not from malnutrition, more like something had been pulling it out, strand by strand. She wore a plain hospital gown, yellowed with age. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, like wax left in the sun too long. She didn't look at me. She didn't move, but I heard her voice. It didn't come from her mouth. It came from somewhere behind my ears, inside my head, but not in the way you think of thoughts. It was like a memory someone else implanted. "You opened the door," she said. "Now it won't close." I dropped the flashlight. The beams spun wildly, catching her face for just a moment. She had no eyes, not sockets, not scars, just smooth, blank skin where they should have been. She stood up. I ran. I didn't bother closing the door behind me. Just ran through the hallway, past the supply shelves, up the elevator, out into the cold morning air. I didn't go back. I quit that same weekend, told them I had a family emergency, moved 3 states away, blocked every number from the ridge. I don't know if that room is still there, but sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I see her, not in my dreams, but in the mirror behind me. Just standing, waiting, and I hear her voice again. You opened the door. Now it won't close. Asterisk, back in 2011, I worked as a temporary night nurse in a long-term psychiatric facility in northern Maine. It wasn't my first time working in mental health, but this place was different from the start. Most of the time, patients in these facilities are either heavily sedated or on routines that keep things predictable. But the Breerfield Institute was off. I only worked the night shift, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., and it always felt like the staff who left at night were relieved, like they were escaping something they didn't want to talk about. They'd say the usual, just keep your keys on you, or stick to your route. But there was always this tension in their eyes, as if something lived there after hours. The layout of the facility was strange, too. A long, U-shaped hallway with all patient rooms facing inward toward an open garden courtyard. And at the far end, what they called the night ward. No patients were kept there anymore. And officially, it was sealed off due to asbestos. But I'd seen the door cracked open once, and the lights inside flickered like the rest of the building didn't even touch that wing. The first few nights were uneventful. I made rounds every hour, checked vitals for patients who needed it, logged med schedules, and avoided the night ward just like I was told. But on my fourth night, everything started to change. Around 2:20 a.m., I was doing a routine pass when I heard something strange. A soft shuffling, like bare feet dragging along tile. I thought a patient had wandered out of bed. I followed the sound down the hallway, but when I turned the corner, there was no one there. The security cameras showed nothing. I let it go. But the next night, heard it again, this time from inside room 14. A patient named Doreen. Doreen didn't talk. She stared at the ceiling all day, didn't eat unless prompted, and hadn't shown any emotional response in the 6 months she'd been there. I walked into her room expecting silence, but she was standing now, facing the window. Her forehead pressed against the glass. I approached her slowly, trying not to startle her. Doreen. She didn't turn, but she spoke. "The ones in the ward are watching," she said. Her voice was dry, raspy, like she hadn't used it in years. "They can't walk until you see them, but once you do, they never stop." My stomach dropped. "Who's watching?" Doreen. She didn't answer, just slowly turned her head toward me. Her face was pale, slack, expressionless, but her eyes, her pupils were dilated completely, and her mouth trembled like she was trying to smile but couldn't remember how. Then she began laughing, or at least trying to. Her throat produced this wet, guttural rasp, somewhere between a chuckle and a death rattle. I called for backup. By the time the others arrived, she was back in bed, catatonic again, like it had never happened. I tried to brush it off. Maybe a one-time episode. Maybe she was mimicking something she heard. But the next night, Room 11's patient Greg's paranoid schizophrenic was having an episode. He was hiding under his bed, clawing at the floor tiles and crying. There in the ward, there in the F*** king walls. Man, you hear them, right? He kept muttering. That scratching, that clicking, you hear it, don't you? That's when I started to hear it too. Every time I passed the night ward hallway, usually dark, silent, I began hearing things. The sound of heels clicking across tile. A door closing softly. Breathing, not mine. Someone else's. Behind me, one night, around 3:45 a.m., I heard a loud metallic clang from inside the night ward. That wing was supposed to be sealed off. No access, no electricity. But when I rounded the corner, I saw something that stopped me cold. The door was wide open. The lights inside were unflickering, like a dying fluorescent bulb. I should have called it in, should have backed off, but something pulled me forward. I stepped inside slowly, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone in here?" It was freezing in there. Not like a broken heating system, but bone-deep cold. My breath came out in visible clouds. And that sound, a soft clicking, almost like fingernails tapping against glass, echoed down the hall. The ward was nothing but old beds, metal restraints, and rusted medical equipment. But as I reached the center of the hallway, I noticed the mirrors. Every room had one, but not the standard shatterproof glass we had in the active units. These were warped, aged, like old dressing mirrors you'd find in a forgotten basement. Most were too dusty to see into, except one. Room 3's mirror was spotless. I stepped in to look, just a glance, and I saw myself, but not quite. My reflection was facing the wrong way. I turned my head left. It turned its head right. I took a step back. It didn't move. Then, slowly, it began to smile. I turned and ran full sprint out of the night ward. I didn't stop until I was back in the main hallway, back in fluorescent light and sterile air. I told my supervisor something had triggered the motion lights, that I thought a raccoon or something had gotten in. That was a lie. I didn't sleep that day, or the next. My final night at Breerfield, I made one last round. All the patients were asleep, quiet. Except Doreen. She was standing again at the window, just like before. But this time, when I entered, she turned to face me. Her eyes were wide, her expression locked in this twisted grimace that was somehow both pleading and knowing. "There, behind the mirrors," she whispered, "and now they know your face." I quit that morning. I never went back. But sometimes, when I catch a glimpse of myself in a mirror late at night, I hesitate because I swear my reflection is just a little slower, as if it's watching me. When my older brother Mark died, he left behind a trail of questions no one could seem to answer. He'd been institutionalized at Hillside Psychiatric Hospital for nearly 3 years. And when they found him unresponsive in his room one rainy morning in October, there wasn't a single mark on his body. Official cause: cardiac arrest. But we knew better. Mark had always been sensitive, empathetic, to the point of self-destruction. My mother used to say he'd been a nurse before everything happened, working night shifts at a children's hospital in Missouri. Then came the whispers, the voices, the paranoia. By the time he checked himself into Hillside, he was convinced someone was following him through mirrors. My parents tried everything before they gave in. At the time, Hillside had a reputation: clean, modern, high-staffed. It was meant to be temporary, a reset, but nothing reset. Things got worse. I hadn't planned to visit after the funeral. I thought closure would come from just letting it go. But 2 months later, I was driving north on a winding road through freezing rain, following an impulse I couldn't explain. I needed to see the place myself. By then, Hillside had been closed for 6 weeks. The hospital shut its doors quietly after Mark's death, citing structural issues and ongoing renovations. But it was clear they wanted out of the spotlight. When I pulled up to the gate, a sagging metal chain blocked the entrance, tied with a simple padlock. The building loomed behind overgrown trees, like a forgotten asylum from a different century tall, and symmetrical, all red brick and stained windows. I didn't hesitate. I'd brought bolt cutters. The inside was exactly what you'd expect from a facility that had tried to erase itself. The reception was stripped bare, power was off, and most hallways were littered with stacks of old paperwork, wheelchairs, and decaying posters about mental wellness. It had been built like a maze, designed to disorient. Everything smelled like mildew and old bleach, but somehow not quite empty. I can't explain it. Like the building still had lungs. Mark had always mentioned a specific area of the hospital. The yellow ward. It didn't appear on the hospital maps, and when I once asked his doctor about it, she just gave me a puzzled look and said no such wing existed. But in his journals, scrawled in handwriting that grew more frantic with every page mark, mentioned it constantly. "They take people there who don't behave," he wrote, "not staff it." He described hallways bathed in an unnatural amber, Light, he said. The walls pulsed. That the air was thicker there. That's where the mirror people waited. I didn't believe it, obviously. I assumed it was a metaphor for sedation, solitary confinement, or just a delusion. But standing there, now I felt something. That same breathless anxiety I used to feel when Mark would call me late at night, whispering that they were watching. The fourth floor had been closed off entirely. Collapsed ceiling tiles, broken gurneys, puddles of rusty water. But down one hallway, past a stairwell lined with old patient art, I saw it. A door at the very end. Faded yellow paint, peeling. Number. No sign. I felt myself step forward before realizing I was moving. The hallway dimmed behind me, like light was being swallowed. I pushed the door open. Inside. Was wrong. The walls were that same pale yellow, but almost organic, like discolored teeth. The corridor stretched impossibly far, and the air was hot, heavy with a syrupy scent like burnt sugar and copper. No light fixtures, but everything glowed faintly like bioluminescence. I took a step, and the sound it made was wet. There were no rooms, just doorless openings every 20 feet, leading to shadowed alcoves. As I passed one, I swear I saw someone crouched in the far corner, motionless, their back to me. I didn't call out. Mark wrote. They hide in reflections. Fear before they take you. Don't let them see you panic. They feed off the tension between thoughts. I heard whispers, but not like voices. It was like thought fragments, snippets of sentences I recognized, but in my voice. You left him too long. He begged you to visit. You didn't listen. I wanted to turn around, but the hall had changed. Behind me was just another stretch of yellow. And that's when I noticed the mirrors. They were subtle. Glassy panels along the wall that hadn't been there before. Each one distorted. In some, my reflection lagged by seconds. In others, I wasn't alone. Something moved. Behind, me beside, me when I turned. Nothing was there. I stopped walking. The whispers grew louder. I turned to one of the mirrors. My reflection stood still. I lifted my hand. It copied me. But there was something in the eyes, something behind them. A ripple moved through the glass. And then my reflection smiled. I hadn't. I backed away. It moved forward. I turned and ran. I don't know how far or how long. I passed dozens of alcoves now filled with figures, some crouched, some suspended, some with faces stretched too wide, as if mimicking expressions they didn't understand. The mirrors multiplied. The yellow light deepened to orange, then red. The air shimmered like heat waves. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. Memories I hadn't thought of in years played in my ears. Regrets, fears, Mark's voice screaming. Eventually, I collapsed at the base of a stairwell that hadn't been there before. It was old, rusted, descending into a pitch-black void. The yellow ward ended there, and something waited at the bottom. I don't know how I escaped. I woke up in my car. Outside the gate, bolt cutters on the passenger seat. My shoes were soaked, my hands bruised. But I was alive. Barely. It's been months since that night. I moved cities. I quit my job. I don't look in mirrors anymore, not unless I absolutely have to. And when I do, I never look too long, because sometimes, just sometimes, I catch my reflection still staring after I've turned away, and it's always smiling.